Hey everybody, welcome to the Anthony and Todd Show. I'm your host Trevor.
And I'm Vincent.
And we've been really slacking the past couple of months. Welcome to the second episode of Album Corral, known as Album Corral Episode 2, Back to the Jungle.
What? Wait, can you please explain that?
No,
I think I missed the vital step in that.
I will not be taking any questions at this time. Basically, we do these album corrals when a bunch of stuff comes out, and we don't have time to do individual reviews on all of them, except for everything here was pretty important, and we just haven't been talking about music as much as we should have over the past couple months. So we were doing really good with reviews at the beginning of the year, and then summer hit, and COVID hit, and we didn't do anything.
And then Joe Budden's presidency hit.
And now here we are. Joe Budden has revitalized me.
Kanye West only gets 20,000 votes, but Joe Budden gets 20 million votes. What's up with that?
What? He's the third best rapper of all time.
I thought he was number one on that stupid list.
I think he was 3. I think like Big Pun was number 1 or something. That's not a joke. Anyway, we got a lot of stuff to talk to you about. So we got some big albums that we're going to hit, and then we got some little albums that we're going to hit. All right, so the first big release that's on our minds today, Gorillaz Song Machine Season 1, Strange Timez. I'm not familiar with this French word. Anyway, Gorillaz have been doing something really different from what they typically do, and since the beginning of the year, they've basically just been releasing loose singles and then collected them all into like one uniform album and added a bunch of bonus tracks onto it. So they've got a lot of really great features on here this time. Some legendary acts like Robert Smith and Elton John. Some more hip-hop related acts like Schoolboy Q, Six Lack, Octavian, Slow Tie, JPEG's on here, Earth Gang, Skepta. It was really just a great album. So let's go through this a little bit.
Yes. So the whole entire concept behind this album is just, as Trevor mentioned, just creating like almost like a perfect single and just like creating these loose singles idea and not having like a theme like Demon Days or Plastic Beach attached to it, or even something like as kind of not as figured out as Humans. It's meant to just be individual tracks that, while be placed next to each other, they sound fine. They don't really relate. And I think that works out really well in their favor. Actually, I think because all these tracks are so momentous and they seem huge and they seem so big and important, it almost kind of takes you back to what made albums like Demon Days and Plastic Beach feel so important. It's like these tracks have like a huge amount of scope to them, and they don't feel like they're just these dead-end ideas that kind of lead nowhere. Like each track takes you on an individual journey, and when it's done, you go to the next. And by the time the album's over, you feel fulfilled because there's so many tracks on here that leave sticky hooks, great performances, and amazing features throughout.
Yeah, I think Robert Smith on this opening track, Strange Times, was the absolute perfect voice to get on here. The old Cure frontman, the prince of goth culture, just really kills it with these really like moany verses. Moving into Valley of the Pagans featuring Beck. I don't think Beck has had this fun and consistent of a performance in years. In the recent years, he's definitely been more goofy and less charismatic, but I feel like here, while he is extremely goofy on this fun rock track, he also brings a lot of charisma that he had in his earlier career. The Lost Chord with Lee John I found to be a really surprising kind of like middle interlude kind of track, I guess, but I still find it to be really haunting and like grandiose. Moving into Pac-Man with Schoolboy Q. Schoolboy Q's career last year was not kind to him. Crash Talk was not a good album, but this I find to be a pretty redeeming verse.
He's off the num-num juice.
He finally kicked the habit. He went to rehab, and he's back on Pac-Man. I think his verse is a lot of fun. This reminds me of a lot of like earlier Gorillaz tracks, specifically Feel Good Inc. The way that he's like shoehorned in there.
It makes me feel more of Clint Eastwood. The way it's
yeah,
just,
that's
like,
another good one.
off. into its like own little thing. Damon has a good performance that carries out the track. Like, he doesn't feel like... That's one thing about this entire album is, like, there's enough Damon. And when he's not there, like, on moments like MLS, it's like there isn't a reason for him to be there in the beginning. To be there to begin with.
Exactly. He knows when to back up a little bit. I was actually reading an interview with him about specifically working with Robert Smith, and like he met him at a Cramps concert and said he loved him at a urinal or something. But he said that like when he was performing with Robert Smith, he knew that their voices weren't going to work well together, and so he backed up a little bit. He didn't sing on that track, and I've got to really appreciate Damon's insight. I feel like he's really smart about this kind of thing. He knows how to use his features to the best of his ability.
Some other great moments. Ares is essentially just a New Order style track, just a complete replica, but it does it so well that it's not really a problem. It even has Peter Hook on it. That I think it's just a great indicator of what made New Order so special to begin with. Friday the 13th with Octavian is just this really weird and strange dub style synth track. Desolé has a nice world vibe, and the extended version on this album has amazing guitars at the closer and just feels like this complete retreat into this like wide open space. Momentary Bliss is an amazing ode to punk by also like incorporating the Gorillaz colorfulness into the production. Opium featuring Earth Gang is really interesting, and how long it takes to build up its production, which is a good thing and a bad thing. I like Earth Gang's performance over Gorillaz type production because it makes them seem more gelatinous. Dr. Doc and Johnny Venus come off as more sporadic, and that's something I really enjoyed about them on the last Spillage Village album. MLS with JPEG and Chai, I think is amazing. I think JPEG is still being JPEG, but this time him being over a more optimistic sounding beat, I feel like colors them in a new light. In a sense, because I feel like JPEG doesn't switch up who he is for Gorillaz. He's still just JPEG. He's still undoubtedly himself and keeps in the forefront, but I feel like this time around with the production and the Chai vocal, it makes them come out to be a little bit more, I guess, cuddlier around the seams.
Yeah, this is a perfect companion track to Grimy Waifu.
And then finally, How Far with Tony Allen and Skepta. This track was released as like a single earlier in the year, but it's the last like bonus track on here. It was released after Tony Allen's passing. And I think it's just an amazing collaboration between Skepta and Gorillaz, and I think Tony Allen on the drums is excellent.
We didn't even get to talk about one of the best tracks on here, the Pink Phantom with Elton John and Black. I find this was a super surprising pairing when I first saw it just like in text, and I was hoping that we would get it before the album, but and we did. What a great track, and such an understated pairing. Elton John is extremely like melodramatic and he's just wilding out on this track, and I love the contrast to Black's like really understated auto-tuned vocals. Also, he doesn't get drawn in the Gorillaz style. I don't know why, because Elton John did.
I think what I like about this is we get three different examples of like broodiness. So like Damon's is normal, like kind of like yelpy, brutal.
Yeah, like some
self.
James Blake stuff.
And then Black is just kind of like high pitched type of like trap oriented brooding, and then Elton John's is very flamboyant brooding, and they all combined in this weird like strange medley. And I like how they harmonize over one another, Elton and Damon, and I like how Six Lack, the performance in the end where Elton and Six Lack kind of harmonize. I think it works out really well.
Yeah. Honestly, this is just a great collection of songs. It's one of their best projects in a long time. Blows the Now and Humans out of the water completely. Makes me feel like Gorillaz are back, and I've seen things from Damon Albarn teasing a new Tame Impala collab with Paul McCartney on the next Season 2, Strange Times 2,
Fuck you.
Back to the Jungle. I'm really excited for it. I don't think that they can do any wrong at this point. I'm very excited for this new Song Machine season.
Also, one thing we didn't mention, there's a Mike Will May It tag because he has production credits on Dead Butterflies.
Oh yeah,
which is probably one of the weaker tracks on here. I think it takes too long to get into the mix, but I think Damon's performance is really captivating. But I don't really care for Kano and Roxanne Aris super much. I don't think either of them are bad. I think there's
I think they're a little underwhelming.
Okay, time to move on. It's time to bust a rhyme and bust a nut. It's the Extinction.
And get eliminated on the Masked Singer.
First go, just like Lil Wayne. Extinction level event 2, The Wrath of God. This new Busta Rhymes album is very complicated because it's not a bad album. It is definitely a good album. I definitely think it's worth your time. But there's just so much clutter in a lot of these spots. There's amazing tracks, don't get me wrong. Don't go with Q-Tip and Busta Rhymes. That collaboration is timeless. It always will be. From the Tribe days to now, it'll always be a perfect collaboration. You have moments like Best I Can featuring Rhapsody, where Busta Rhymes and Rhapsody are telling a narrative of these two divorced parents that are in a custody battle over their kid, and it comes out really, really well, and it's really honest, and it's really moving. Look Over Your Shoulder with Kendrick Lamar is completely captivating. It showcases, it gives, weirdly enough, on a Busta Rhymes track, Kendrick Lamar is taking the legend spot. That's the legend feature to it. That's like his that's his Slick Rick feature on West Side Gun. It's like,
yes,
he's the legend spot on this album, weirdly enough.
I read somewhere that this was actually like one of his first actually credited features in a really long time, like a couple of years. Kendrick's.
Yeah. So it's nice to see him back in the mix. I hope he puts out his rock album pretty soon. The last two tracks, Freedom and Satanic, I think really get to the meat of what the album is and what something like the title Extinction Level Event 2, The Wrath of God, would mean in getting to more political subjects. But I think a lot of this album just wastes time with air signs growing off, a ton of Chris Rock skits that are really annoying. It's like you took Blame Game
Madagascar.
yeah, Madagascar and Blame Game off of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and you extended it out over the course of an album. It just gets really tiresome. There's just some miss-ups here and there. Like Busta's flow is consistent, his performance is consistent, but like there's just some odd choices. Oh No has this really basic trap beat. There's Slow Flow with Old Dirty Bastard who's on the track. Like this video game like chiptune inspired beat just doesn't work. And the posthumous performance from him just doesn't, I don't think it's really needed.
The ODB feature feels really weird because like he passed away such a long time ago. Like this is completely different than like a Juice WRLD feature in 2020.
Yeah.
This is like Tupac hologram coming back in 2050.
Yeah. Out of My Mind has this weird like Poison sample. The Young God Speaks is a perfect example why this album takes up too much time getting to things. It just has a Jackson 5 sample. It doesn't really fit. Busta Rhymes. I was going to say another example, but Trevor put in the notes. 5 minutes of Busta Rhymes taking his pills at the old folks' home. And that's kind of what it feels like. It feels like there's just excuses to just go to these odd and ends and tangents that don't really make sense. Buster is consistent, but I feel like the setup to a lot of these tracks and these interludes just feel like they go on forever. There's too many tracks. It's like an hour and something long. It could easily be like 40 minutes. One album I was thinking about, or a couple albums I was thinking about that this album could potentially be if it got rid of its clutter is Rhapsody, weirdly enough, with Layla's Wisdom, and Anderson .Paak with Oxnard. Both albums that have very diverse showcases of performance and character across their entire runtime, and they kind of are a bit longer, but they don't take as much time with their tracks or some of these interlude ideas as Busta does with this. And I feel like there's just too many moments on here. And I feel like if he would have slummed it down, we would have got something around the length of an Oxnard or Layla's Wisdom. It would have felt like a more cohesive and complete project that showcased the diversity of him and kind of made him feel more important than he is on this. And that's pretty much it.
Moving on to one of our new favorite artists, Darko the Super. We have obviously interviewed him on the show, met him through Twitter, and this guy has put out his 305th album this year. His work is incredibly prolific. He has a really long discography, and the 3 albums that he's released this year, The Devil Defeated back earlier this year, Nevermind over the summer, and just yesterday, at the time of recording, there's A Horse in the Hospital, his latest and possibly greatest work so far. This dude is super wacky. He's got hilarious lyricism and references all over the map, but I think that we just wanted to take some time to shout him out and talk about some of these albums that came out.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to note here is that as these 3 albums were released over time, I think each project's better than the last of these 3. I think The Devil Defeated is... as time goes on, I feel like I really liked it to begin with, but now I just think there's some definite weak moments where I feel like Darko is a little bit too loose and it kind of loses sense of purpose. But Nevermind kind of counterpoints that, where I feel like he's as loose to date, and it kind of suits him because we're getting these examples of just pure catchy and hilarious hip-hop, tracks like Beatbox and Black Cherry Monotonin, Superman and P.F. Chang's and Motorola, with tracks where these lines and these choruses and these hooks get stuck in your head. I can't remember a moment where me and Trevor hung out this summer where one of us didn't bring up one of the lines from Nevermind, just because these hooks just kept on getting stuck in our heads. They're just so fun and repetitive, and I feel like Darko really showcased himself as a more versatile lyricist. I think one knocking of the album, though, however, is I think a little bit of the vocal mixing is kind of muttered, and that could be some of the effects he uses. I think it's obviously more apparent on There's a Horse in the Hospital and The Devil Defeated that his vocals sound a little bit more crisper and cleaner. Mm-hmm. There's a Horse in the Hospital feels more like an album compared to Nevermind. And Devil Defeats feels more like mixtapes. Feels like there's a different stance. It's more versatile, and it has a ton of different personality to it, and a ton of memorable moments like Sneaking Out of the Hospital, Here Comes the Dark, Greasy September, High Five with Virita, Crack Smoking Donkeys from Outer Space, Glass Eyes, A Little Piece of Plastic, and Mandy with Harvey Cliff MC. Which is
literally just a recount of the movie Mandy.
But it is in the most fun way possible. I think on this album, Darko kind of places himself in a more eloquently sewn corner, while I think there are a couple moments where I feel like he isn't present on the mic. He's doing the production, especially Mandy and High Five, and there's no real clean cut end to this album. I think, however, all these tracks being completely polished and fun and glamorous and depicting Darko in a new light, he seems less goofy, but at the same time more personable.
Yeah, I completely agree. I definitely think he's taken some more inspiration from his favorite artist, Kool Keith, on There's a Horse in the Hospital. The title's obviously inspired by that, as well as the album cover is inspired by Ghetto Boys' We Can't Be Stopped. Sometimes I feel like Darko is just able to look inside my mind and look inside my brain and know what I like, and he'll reference all sorts of different things that I understand. I almost feel like he's speaking directly to us sometimes in his albums. But yeah, I think Horse in the Hospital has to be his most cohesive project yet. It feels all very cut from the same cloth. It's not it's a bunch of loose tracks thrown together. I feel like there was a lot of time and effort put together into this to decide what would make the album and what would not. In his past albums, I feel like sometimes It's just like whatever tracks that he makes are the ones that get put on the album. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But this one feels like it's very like selective with the process of picking tracks. I think this is probably his best project to date. Another thing I really like about Darko, he's not afraid to sample things that he probably doesn't have the clearance to. And that makes I think that makes his music all the more enjoyable. He's like not afraid to use popular songs. He's not afraid to sample things like the Beatles or 10cc as he does on A Little Piece of Plastic. He's not afraid to just do really weird and wacky things, and it all lines up with his personality and the way that he paints himself as an artist.
If I had to recommend you some tracks, I definitely would say go to Nevermind first and listen to tracks like Beatbox and Superman and Motorola. And if you like that, go to There's a Horse in the Hospital, because I think Nevermind is the more accessible, but There's a Horse in the Hospital is the more accessible project overall. If that makes sense.
Yeah. For this year, at least. Otherwise, thank you, Bass God. Card Tricks for Dogs. There's tons of great projects in his past discography that I think you'll have a fun time with if you enjoy this.
Yeah. Moving forward, Homeboy Sandman, Don't Feed the Monster. There's a monster in my basement, and I feed it sandwiches.
Homeboy Sandman is an artist that I've known about for a long time, but I don't feel like I've ever super been able to get into his music. I really like his collaboration with John Wayne back from a couple of years ago, America the Beautiful, but I almost feel like Sandman just kind of stuck to the same flow throughout his career. But couple months ago when Trauma was released, the first single off of Don't Feed the Monster, entirely produced by Quelle Chris, another artist that we really adore, I found a whole new respect for Homeboy. Trauma, he talks about all the different, trauma that he's endured throughout his childhood and his life growing up, and how it made him the person that he is today. This feels extremely cathartic. It's very difficult to listen to and just listen to these stories that he's telling you and know that they're like a true story. But I also feel like deep down, this album was probably very tough, but liberating to make for Sandman. And I have a whole newfound appreciation for him. Other great tracks on here, Extinction, with this have all the cool people died when the new cool people be born, gets stuck in my head all the time. Hello Dancer, with the only feature on this album with Quelle Chris,
talking about how Homeboy Sandman goes to a bar, meets a girl, comes home and gets naked in front of her for the first time, and then it goes into more details about his body and his body image and his image of himself. And then Quelle does the exact same thing.
I think it's a really interesting track. It's very like 80s pop inspired. This hook on here is extremely catchy. I think Quelle's verse is excellent. And Sandman talking about like himself and his own body image is something that I think a lot of people struggle with, but not a lot of like rappers talk about. And I really enjoyed his like take on it. Other great tracks, Waiting on My Girl, which is a very lighthearted track in the grand scheme of things, where he's talking about his girlfriend getting ready to go places, and while she takes a super long time and he gets annoyed by it, he also has like a lot more time to write raps and write music during that time. Biters is a really funny track because he's talking about like all these other rappers out here. It's like very braggadocious, talking about other rappers out here taking from other people's styles. They're not developing their own style as musicians, but it's funnier if you imagine he's talking about people actually biting other people. I think about that story of the guy that took the bath salts and like bit that guy's face on this. Do you remember that story?
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's a really funny track. I like to see how many times he can say biters. He's like just really angry about it. It's got a lot of character. Walk by Faith, extremely sharp contrast from his normal flows. He's hanging on to every single word and really enunciating everything that he says, so you can get, like, you understand his point. He's getting his point across, and he's still rapping in like his same, couplet style verses, but he is just slowing everything down so you know and digest what he's saying. He's like very serious about his faith and how he feels like God has saved him on this album. And finally wrapping it all up with Straight, the anti-gay anthem.
God damn it.
No, I'm just kidding. It's a really great track. It's almost like rock inspired at the end. Really wraps it up well, and he's still, he's talking about how he still loves himself and he still knows that he's on the right path, even though he's, he thinks he's getting older and aging, and how he feels like he has missed out on a lot of great opportunities in his life, and he feels like the trauma that he described at the beginning of the album may have like stunted him in the long run. He still feels like he's on the right path and he's making the best decisions. Quelly Chris does a really bang up job with the production on all this stuff. I really like tracks like Shorty Heights, Monument, Triple Warmer. We talked about Hello Dancer already. Quelly's production, I think, just really ties together everything.
Yeah, I think basically what Homeboy's saying, man, started with this new leg of his career on Dusty, an album we reviewed last year. I think any of the complaints I had about this album are gone with this one, because he introduces a new level of intimacy. He's more personable this time around. I feel like I actually get to know something about it. I feel like this album ties together really well. I just think all the odds and the ends that didn't relate on the last album are fulfilled with this one, and I feel like I'm getting a new look into someone who I haven't really had the chance to see in this light before. Next is Clipping Visions of Bodies Being Burned. What was the thing you said earlier?
Visions of thotties being burned.
God damn it.
No, Scottie Pippen being burned. That's what it was.
That's a good one. Clipping released an album last year that had a similar experimental horrorcore theme called There's Existed an Addiction to Blood. And while I feel like the last album had more digestible singles like Blood of the Fang, I think this album is better overall because it takes less time to go to these weird moments, and it somehow gets more experimental. It's somehow way harder to digest, but somehow over the course of the album, I feel like they managed to completely make majority of the tracks on this album worth it. And I like how it seems determined to be Diggs this time around. I feel like he's dropping some of the best verses of his entire career. I think some of the narratives he's dropping on tracks like Say the Name and Check the Lock are completely incredible. These stories that he's telling, some of the performances are completely catching, like Enlacing, I think, is an amazing moment. I think the production on this album is great. I think they try to, at this point in the career, try to break the mold even more and try to get more experimental. The first time listening to this, I was kind of confused on how to make out this album because I felt like it just kind of melted my brain, which is both a good thing and a bad thing because I feel like they found a way to get rid of my expectations of what they're capable for and give me something new. And overall, I think this is a really incredible album.
Yeah, I really have to agree. I do think that the last album was a little more like single friendly and, as you said, easier to digest. But you're right, like, I appreciate that they don't take a lot of time to, get into the weird stuff. If you're listening to Clipping now in 2020, most likely you've also listened to Clipping in years past. You can see this kind of evolution that they've had from their album back in 2016, Splendor and Misery, up to There Existed an Addiction to Blood from last year, and like what they're capable of. You understand what they're doing, you understand what their take on horrorcore is going to sound like, and so I feel like they don't have to waste time, trying to initiate newbies into this. There's a lot of great tracks on here that I find super interesting and mind-melting, as you said. Also, I got to give a shout out. This is the second Ghetto Boys reference in this entire podcast that we're doing, but the track name, the album name, Visions of Bodies Being Burned, as well as the sample in Say the Name, is from one of the opening lines of Mine's Playing Tricks on Me, which is, in my opinion, one of the greatest hip-hop songs ever made. Absolutely love that song.
One thing I also have to give this album, it doesn't have an 18-minute piano burning segment. So some of the pretentious stuff from the last album is replaced with more experimental stuff, weirdly enough.
And it lands better, for sure.
Which is weird because you think that would kind of make it more pretentious, but it actually saves you from a little bit of the I guess, like, I remember the La Mara Ordina.
La Mala Aldina, yeah,
with the, like, the extended outro with the noise artist. Like, it didn't fit.
No.
But, like, this
the only
time
thing that I miss on here is the haunting interlude.
Yeah, with the gorilla.
I really miss that one.
Because gorillas are haunted. Reject modernity, become monkey. Next is Open Mike Eagle, anime, trauma, and divorce. Open Mike Eagle, prolific art rapper, coined the term art rap, and he's absolutely amazing. He has released some of my favorite hip-hop albums of all time. And I think with this album, I think he showcases a lot of pain that he went through in the last year, and I appreciate that. I feel like, again, going back to Homeboy Sandman, it's kind of like a thing that I think that could be painful, but also cathartic in some sense.
Yeah, I think that this album got a lot of unnecessary hate because people saying that it, like, didn't portray anything. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's not really, like, talking about anything important, but I'm not sure that this album was meant for us. I think it was meant for Mike.
Yeah.
I think it was meant for his own healing and what he needed to do in order to feel better about the situation. And I really appreciate him, like, being open with us. I think that it says exactly what it needs to. I think that he talks just as much as he absolutely, you know, as much as he needs to get his point across and to understand and process his feelings better. And I just really appreciate that. I appreciate him sharing this with us.
I like the tracks on here. Like, I love moments like I'm a Joestar, Black Power Fantasy. Like, take that end title alone. That's what the track is it's Mike just, like, living in his inner fantasy. And I absolutely, like, love that. Death Parade. I love the moment where he goes, he fucked you up and you fucked me up and I fuck you up and he fucked me up and I fuck you up and she fucked me up and I fuck you up and she fucked me up. You didn't react to that joke as well as I thought you were.
I didn't know when you were going to end it. I thought you were reading the actual lyrics.
Like on Death Parade, this kind of like circle of trauma, I think it's really interesting to dive into that. Black Mirror episode ended by marriage, I think is absolutely fantastic. But he doesn't list what episode it was, so 0 out of 10.
He's said on Twitter that I don't think he ever will. I don't think he'll ever talk about it.
I think it's the one where the guy fucks the pig.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's the one where somebody took a picture of their microwave. That's the real Black Mirror.
Comparing it to past Open Mike Eagle albums, it's still consistent. It's still a good album. Dark Comedy, Brick Body Kids, still Daydream, and his last EP, What Happens When I Try to Relax, I feel like are all better than this, and especially like his progression on those last 3 projects. I feel like he's still got room to mess with the territory he was working in his EP, because I feel like he was progressing. Like one of the tracks, the end title was Peak Up Mike Eagle for a reason, because I feel like he was progressing into this almost godlike tier version of himself. And on this, it's not saying like these tracks are like bad or anything. I feel like he gets into some more intimate elements, and I like how he features his son and a bunch of other things, and he showcases himself off more and gets more interior with the subjects instead of being more abstract and absurd. And I appreciate that, but I just feel like in comparative to other projects, this one's not as... I don't favor this one as much as others, if that makes sense. I think others were better. This is good, this is great, but others were better. That's one thing I can knock on it. Yeah,
and I think, well, I guess in some instance, I understand where you're coming from. I also really enjoyed other albums like Brick Body Kids, Hello Personal Film Festival, those Dark Twisted Fantasy, dark twisted comedy. But I find myself really returning to this album because I find it to be like bite-sized. I think that it's very well curated. He talks about everything that he needs to talk about, and I have come with more newfound appreciation for Mike. Sometimes I feel like he fell into some like samey kind of things, but here I think that he switches it up just enough. I really appreciate him talking about things like this, as I stated before. I didn't like the track Bukirati as a single, but I really like it as a part of this. I also didn't really care for I'm a Joestar. I didn't really understand the appeal behind it, but I appreciate it within the context of the album. Tracks that I didn't really care for, Airplane Boneyard towards the end, I don't absolutely care for that. And 15, 20 Feet Ocean, live from the Joko Cruise is super funny, and I really like the track, but the audio quality is so bad. It's so bad. Oh my god, I have to turn my speakers all the way up to even understand, like, what he's saying. It's very heartwarming to hear him rapping with his son, and I can just imagine them on this cruise, and I can imagine them, like, snorkeling, and I think the whole scenario is really funny, but I, like, cannot understand them. The Joko Cruise needs better recording equipment.
Yeah. Next is Black Thought, Streams of Thought, Volume 3, Cain and Abel. This is the third in the string of Streams of Thought projects, the first one being an EP, which I really enjoyed, the second one being an album, which I was kind of less so on, and this third one, I think I'm in the same place as I was too. I think the first one, the appeal was kind of the bite-sizedness, I guess, and I feel like it was just the perfect length, it was the perfect size, all the material covered was fluent and it worked together. This, not so much. I just feel like it's just too long. And while Black Thought's an amazing MC, like one of the greatest of all time, I just feel like he's just pushing himself too thin on this. Like, you get into, like, after the middle, I feel like not a lot sticks after you get into those two Portugal the Man and the Last Artful Dodger tracks. Like, it just, like, especially the second one, Nature the Beast, that is way too poppy, and it just feels completely awkward for Black Thought to be on it. But there's some amazing moments, like State Prisoner, Good Morning with Pusha T, Swiss Beats and Killer Mike. That's like an excellent collaboration. Magnificent, Stay-Cum with Schoolboy Q, I think, is phenomenal. But, like, I feel like the biggest thing against this is he just spreads himself too thin, and that's all I really gotta say.
Yeah, I've got to really agree. Black Thought, I think, is absolutely legendary, but here sometimes I just feel like, why does he keep making the volumes longer and longer? What I really liked about Streams of Thought Volume 1 is that it was, like, very condensed. It was just like a normal, EP kind of thing. And the next one was like 20 minutes. I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. And this one's like 40 minutes. Why is he thinking so much?
There's too many streams.
There are too many streams.
Actually, yeah, no, this is the ocean of thought. We need to get back to the stream.
Yeah, but I think some of his, like, opening tracks, State Prisoner, Good Morning with Pusha T, Swizz, and Killer Mike, Magnificent's an excellent solo track, Stake-'em with Schoolboy Q. Once again, Schoolboy Q is really making up for his career last year. But I think that those are a really great, like, set of tracks. Other than that, not a whole lot stuck with me on here. When he hits, he really hits. But when he doesn't, it feels kind of like wasted potential, because I know he's capable of so much more.
Next, Dorian Electra, My Agenda. Dorian Electra, one of the most upcoming people in this very weird art pop, avant pop space. I'm going to call it the 100 Gex space, because that's truly what it is the 100 Gex Charlie XCX place. Put out a fantastic album last year that we all absolutely adored. And this new album was, like, the singles for it was just hit after hit. First we got Sorry Bro, I Love You. Then we got Give Great Thanks. We got Edgelord with Rebecca Black. My Agenda with Village People and Pussy Riot of all people. Like, it was just so weird, but at the same time, gelatinous and amazing. And took a lot of risk in pop and was also at the same time very catchy and unforgettable. This is a good album. I'm going to get that out of the way again. But I think it kind of suffers from an effect we talked about before, where the album's made up of the singles, and the new stuff we get, it's pretty much all of it's fine, but it's not as memorable as the singles, which make up a majority of this 20-minute runtime.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. The singles here present are excellent, but some of the other tracks, like, I would call them deep cuts, I guess, don't always hit like they should.
Yeah.
I think that's all I've got to say about that.
I think some of the ones that have stuck with me a little bit more time as time goes on. F the World, I think, has grown on me quite a bit, but Ram It Down is just, I feel like just a complete mess of where I think that's a little bit too far of where these ideas should go for Dorian and Electra, like trying to mix metal and pop and experimentation. It just doesn't, it seems like a little bit too much with the mood killer Little Marco and Little Texas features. It just doesn't really work for me, but a majority of this album does. Like I love Edgelord. The Rebecca Black feature is absolutely excellent. Great Thanks is just completely compliant sexually track. I just think it's hilarious. Sorry Bro, I Love You is amazing. Again, Village People is so momentous on my agenda. Gentleman and My Lady are two sides of like the same coin, and I think this is absolutely a fun project that's definitely worth a listen. Big Sean with Detroit 2. I finally got around to listening to this just because I wanted to see if it was actually good, because I thought for the longest time this, whatever was the next Big Sean project, was just going to be absolute trash, because everything building up to it, like the singles we released, just seemed like it was just going to be just bad. And we got to it, and I was actually pleasantly surprised, because while this thing I think is a little bit cramped with the runtime, there's an absolute love for Detroit on it, and it seems genuine, and not just by him but by his features. I love the story by Dave Chappelle and Eric Badu and Stevie Wonder. They all like showcase an absolute like care for Detroit. I like the Friday Night Cypher with a bunch of Detroit artists and Eminem, who has this almost legendary spot and actually does like a very decent performance. There's some poppier moments like Wolves featuring Post Malone. I love Deep Reverence with Nipsey Hussle. Still I Rise is a good closer. Like there's filler on here because there's some features that don't work, and Big Sean is still Big Sean, and that's only going to get you so far because there's moments where he is corny. But I feel like Big Sean has proved himself with this as a capable rapper, but just going forward just needs to fine-tune himself in his performance, because there's an absolute dedication to this project, but I feel like sometimes it just feels like a bit too much, especially with the Lil Wayne feature on here. That's absolute trash. Next, Zeal and Ardor with Wake of a Nation. This EP is essentially just a summary of 2020 and kind of where we are. Vigil is heavily based around Black Lives Matter, and I think it's a perfect thought process behind the year 2020. And I feel like combining gospel, spirituals, and black metal onto one thing works out very, very, and also alternative a bit. On this actually works out really, really well in the Zeal and Ardor's favor. I think these are some of their most catchiest songs, but also some of the most potent lyricism we got. Vigil is a completely heart-shattering, but also at the same time mind-blowing track. Wake of the Nation's a terrific closer. My least favorite moments are some of the black metal moments, but even then they still have it down to a formula where it feels completely competent and doesn't take up too much space, and it just doesn't feel like shredding for the purpose of shredding. Like, it works out really well. And this is a fantastic EP.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Zeal and Ardor have really grown on me. I really enjoyed their past albums, but this one feels like a lot more digestible and bite-sized. I think that they should continue to release albums that touch on current events and how they're feeling within different different points of the year, different parameters about specific like social issues, because I think that those create the strongest like musical moments for them. And also I think they hit harder when they're more current, and they come in like little packages versus huge long albums about like one topic can get redundant at a point. But Wake of a Nation I think was excellent.
And yeah, that's all we're going to talk about today on Album Corral. We covered a lot of stuff. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, guys, if you want to follow us on social media, find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Anthony and Todd. You can find us on youtube.com/The Anthony and Todd Show. You can find us on Podbean, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Play Podcasts, and Spotify. But search The Anthony and Todd Show in your favorite podcast browser. You can support us monetarily on Patreon, patreon.com/The Anthony and Todd Show. until next time, guys, I'm Vincent.
I'm Trevor.
And see ya, boyos.
Bye, everybody.